Ambassador Taman stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Coalition, staring at the massive star map that covered the entire wall. The map showed thousands of star systems, trade routes, and territories of different alien species. But there was one area that made him feel cold every time he looked at it. A gray section in the outer rim marked simply as Human Territory, Do Not Enter. Taman had been the Coalition's top diplomat for 20 years, but he had never seen anyone return from human space unchanged. The stories were always the same and always disturbing. Ships would go missing near the border and return weeks later with crews that seemed different. They were not hostile or dangerous, but something in their eyes had changed. They spoke in whispers about things that should not be possible. Captain Minho had returned just yesterday from a routine supply mission to the border systems. His ship looked normal from the outside, but Taman noticed something strange when he visited the docking bay. The crew moved together like they were thinking the same thoughts. When one person reached for a tool, another would hand it to them, before being asked. When someone started to speak, others would finish their sentences perfectly. Minho himself seemed calm and peaceful in a way that made Taman nervous. The captain had always been rough around the edges, quick to anger, and faster to fight. Now he smiled gently when he spoke, and his voice carried a strange certainty that everything would be fine. When Taman asked about his mission, Minho's eyes grew distant. "We never actually entered human space," Minho had said slowly. "But we got close enough to see one of their ships. It was beautiful, Ambassador. Not like our ships that fight against space to move forward. Their ship seemed to dance with the stars. The pilot waved at us through the view screen, and somehow we could feel her happiness at seeing us." Taman had pressed for more details, but Minho could only shake his head. "You would have to see it yourself to understand. They are not what we thought they were. They are not what anyone thinks they are." Now Taman walked through the archives deep beneath the Coalition building, searching for answers. The oldest records were kept here, from the time when the Coalition first made contact with humanity 300 years ago. Most of the files were classified at the highest levels, but Taman's position gave him access to almost everything the first contact reports made for disturbing reading. The exploration fleet had been led by Admiral Kyung-ho, one of the Coalition's greatest military minds. They had approached human space expecting to find another species like all the others, either primitive and easy to conquer or advanced and ready for war. Instead, they found something that changed their understanding of what was possible. Admiral Kyung-ho's final report was brief and confusing. "The humans welcomed us with genuine kindness. They offered to share their technology and knowledge freely. They asked nothing in return except friendship. This generosity is more terrifying than any weapon. I recommend immediate isolation protocols. The universe works differently in their space." Attached to the report were technical scans that made no sense. Human ships that seemed to phase in and out of reality. Energy readings that suggested they were drawing power from empty space itself. Most disturbing were the biological scans of the humans they met. The readings kept changing, as if the humans were deciding what they wanted to be at any given moment. Taman found a personal log from one of the fleet's scientists, Dr. Yunwoo. The entries started normal enough, documenting first contact procedures and initial observations. But as the days progressed, the tone changed dramatically. Day 15. The humans invited us to visit their home planet. The journey should have taken 3 weeks with our fastest ships. We arrived in 6 hours. When I asked how this was possible, our human guide just smiled and said that space had agreed to be smaller for us today. Day 18. I watched a human child playing in a garden. When she grew tired of the flowers being red, she asked them politely to be blue instead. They changed color immediately. When I expressed amazement, she seemed confused by my reaction. She said all flowers are happy to be different colors if you ask them nicely. Day 22. I am beginning to understand why Admiral Kyung-ho wants to classify this mission. The humans do not use technology the way we understand it. They have become friends with the basic forces of nature. Gravity bends around them not because they have gravity manipulators, but because gravity likes them and wants to help. Day 25. I asked Dr. Jinsu, one of their scientists, how they achieved such impossible things. She looked puzzled and said they simply asked the universe politely if it would mind working differently for them. She seemed genuinely surprised when I told her this was not how physics worked for other species. The final entry was the most disturbing. Day 30. I am changing. I can feel it happening. Yesterday I asked a broken scanner to please work again and it did. This morning I convinced a locked door that it would be happier open. I understand now why we must return to Coalition space immediately. Human ideas are contagious. Exposure to their way of thinking changes how we interact with reality itself. Taman closed the file and sat back in his chair. The pattern was clear and had been repeated dozens of times over 3 centuries. Every ship that ventured close to human space returned with crews that had been fundamentally altered, not through force or technology, but through exposure to a completely different way of understanding existence. He pulled up the most recent reports from the border systems. Strange energy readings were increasing in frequency. Ships reported instrument malfunctions that somehow made their equipment work better than before. There were accounts of asteroids that changed course to avoid collisions without any visible means of propulsion, and stars that seemed to burn brighter when human ships passed nearby. The Coalition's greatest scientists had tried for centuries to understand what made humans different. Some theorized they had discovered a new form of energy. Others believed they had unlocked the secrets of quantum mechanics. A few suggested they had made contact with beings from higher dimensions, but Taman was beginning to suspect the truth was both simpler and more terrifying. The humans had not conquered the universe through force or cleverness. They had made friends with it. And friendship, as any diplomat knew, was far more powerful than any weapon. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. His assistant's voice came through the communicator with barely controlled excitement. Ambassador, we have received a transmission from human space. It is addressed to you personally. Taman felt his blood turn cold. In 300 years, humanity had never initiated contact with the Coalition. They had remained peacefully in their corner of the galaxy, occasionally helping lost ships or responding to direct communication, but never reaching out first. Made his way quickly to the communication center, his mind racing with possibilities. The transmission was audio only, and the voice that came through the speakers was warm and friendly, speaking in perfect Coalition standard greetings. Ambassador Taman. My name is Nari, and I represent the humans of this sector. We hope this message finds you well. We have been watching the increased activity near our borders with interest and some concern. Perhaps it is time for our peoples to meet properly. Would the Coalition be interested in cultural exchange? We have so much we could learn from each other. The message was simple and polite, but it sent shockwaves through everyone who heard it. After centuries of isolation, humanity was finally ready to open their doors to the galaxy. Taman stared at the communication panel, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. The question was not whether they should respond, but whether the galaxy was ready for whatever friendship with humanity would bring. 3 weeks after receiving the transmission from human space, Ambassador Taman stood on the observation deck of Coalition Central, watching the most impossible thing he had ever seen. A human ship was approaching the station, but it was not moving through space in any way that made sense. The vessel seemed to flicker in and out of existence, appearing closer each time it reappeared. Sometimes it looked solid and metallic like normal ships. Other times it seemed to be made of light itself. The Coalition's best sensors could not get consistent readings on it. One moment it registered as a small transport, the next as something the size of a battleship. Admiral Jiho stood beside Taman, his face pale with worry. Sir, our weapons systems keep asking permission to stand down. The ship has not activated any defensive measures that we can detect, but our targeting computers refuse to lock onto it. They keep displaying error messages that say the target is too friendly to engage. Taman nodded grimly. Even their military technology was being affected by the human presence. Have you ever seen anything like this, Admiral? Once, Jiho replied quietly. During the Kepler station incident 50 years ago. A Coalition research vessel got too close to human space during a navigation error. When they returned, their Ship could do things our engineers swore were impossible. It could repair itself by asking damaged components to remember how they used to work. The crew said they learned the technique from humans who helped them when their life support failed. The human ship finally settled into a docking bay. Though settle was not the right word, it seemed to gently convince the bay that it had always been designed to hold exactly that type of vessel. The docking clamps moved on their own to secure it, and even the artificial gravity seemed to adjust itself to make the human crew more comfortable. Dr. Nari emerged from the ship looking exactly like what she claimed to be, a middle-aged scientist with kind eyes and a warm smile. She wore simple clothes that seemed to shift color slightly depending on the lighting, and she carried no visible technology except for a small device that might have been a translator. What disturbed Taman most was how ordinary she appeared. After centuries of fearful stories and impossible reports, he had expected something obviously alien or threatening. Instead, Nari looked like someone who might teach children or tend a garden. She waved cheerfully at the reception committee, as if she were visiting old friends. Ambassador Taman, she said, her voice carrying easily across the docking bay despite speaking normally. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me. I have been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. Taman stepped forward cautiously. Dr. Nari, welcome to Coalition Central. We are honored by your visit, though I confess we are also curious about your reasons for making contact after so many years. Nari's smile grew brighter. Oh, that is simple enough to explain. The universe told us it was ready. The casual way she said it made several Coalition officials take a step backward. Taman managed to keep his diplomatic composure. The universe told you? Well, not in words exactly, Nari replied, seeming genuinely puzzled by their reaction. But surely you have noticed how eager space has become lately. The way distant objects seem closer than they should be. How damaged equipment fixes itself when no one is looking. The way stars shine a little brighter when people are watching. The universe is excited about something, and we think it wants our peoples to meet. Admiral Jiho cleared his throat nervously. Dr. Nari, our records indicate that previous contact with your people has resulted in unusual effects on our technology and personnel. Can you explain why this happens? Nari tilted her head thoughtfully. Unusual effects? I am not sure what you mean. When beings spend time together, they naturally begin to understand each other better. Perhaps what you call unusual effects are simply the universe trying to help us communicate more clearly. She gestured around the docking bay, and Taman noticed that everything seemed to be working more smoothly than normal. The air recyclers hummed with perfect efficiency, the lights provided exactly the right amount of illumination, and even the deck plates seemed more comfortable under their feet. For instance, Nari continued, I asked the translation device to help us understand each other completely, not just convert words but share meanings and feelings. It was happy to help, so now we can speak freely without worrying about misunderstandings. Dr. Hyejin, the Coalition's chief xenobiologist, stepped forward with her scanner active. Dr. Nari, would you mind if I took some basic biological readings? For our records, of course, Nari agreed pleasantly. Though I should warn you that the readings might vary depending on what I am thinking about at the time. The scanner immediately began displaying impossible results. Nari's cellular structure seemed to shift and change as they watched. Sometimes she registered as completely human. Other times the readings suggested she was photosynthetic like a plant. And occasionally the scanner insisted she was somehow related to the crystalline structures found in certain types of rock. How is this possible? Dr. Hyejin whispered. I asked my cells to be more adaptable, Nari explained simply. Living in space requires flexibility. Sometimes it is useful to breathe water instead of air, or to absorb energy directly from starlight. My body is happy to make adjustments when needed. Taman felt a chill run down his spine. The casual way Nari spoke about impossibilities was more unnerving than any threat could have been. Dr. Nari, what exactly do you want from us? To be friends, she replied immediately. Humanity has spent centuries learning to work with the universe instead of against it. We have discovered wonderful things about how existence functions when you approach it with kindness and curiosity. But we have been alone for so long. The universe keeps showing us glimpses of your peoples, your art, your music, your ways of thinking. It would like us to share what we have learned. Admiral Jiho's jaw tightened. And what have you learned exactly? Nari's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. Oh, so many wonderful things. How to convince matter to reorganize itself into more useful forms. How to ask energy to flow in new directions. How to persuade space and time to be more flexible when circumstances require it. But most importantly, we learned that the universe is not empty and hostile, as most species believe. It is full of consciousness and eager to help anyone who treats it with respect. She paused and looked around at their shocked faces. I can see this is difficult to understand without examples. Would the coalition be interested in a cultural exchange program? We could invite representatives from each member species to visit human space and see for themselves how we live. In return, we would love to learn about your technologies and social structures. The suggestion sent immediate panic through the coalition officials. Every previous exposure to human space had resulted in fundamental changes to those involved. But Nari seemed to anticipate their concerns. I understand your worries, she said gently. Change can be frightening, especially when it challenges basic assumptions about how reality works. But change is also how all beings grow and learn. We promise that no one would be forced to accept our way of thinking. The universe respects free will above all else, Taman found his voice. Dr. Nari, what guarantees can you give us that our people would return unchanged? Nari's expression grew thoughtful. None at all, she admitted. Anyone who truly understands how the universe works will inevitably see their relationship with it change. But I can promise that they would return happier, healthier, and more capable than when they left. Is change necessarily a bad thing if it leads to improvement? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Taman realized they were facing a choice that would determine the future of galactic civilization. Accept the human invitation and risk fundamental transformation, or maintain the status quo and wonder forever what possibilities they might have missed. Admiral Jiho stepped closer to Taman and spoke quietly. Sir, with respect, this could be exactly what we have feared for 3 centuries. If human ideas spread throughout coalition space, we might lose everything that makes us who we are. But Dr. Hijin looked fascinated rather than frightened. Ambassador, think of what we could learn. If they have truly found a way to work with the fundamental forces of nature instead of fighting them, the benefits could be incredible. Nari waited patiently while they debated, her presence somehow making the air itself feel more peaceful. Finally, Taman made the decision that would change everything. Dr. Nari, the coalition accepts your invitation for cultural exchange. We will select volunteers from willing member species to visit human space and learn from your people. Nari's smile was radiant. Wonderful. I think you will find the experience quite educational. The universe is so excited to finally make new friends. The expedition ship crossed into human space on a Tuesday, though by the time they arrived at their destination, 3 of the crew members insisted it was actually Friday. Time, their human guide Kangjin explained with an apologetic smile. Sometimes, got excited when new visitors arrived and would skip ahead to the interesting parts, Doctor. Suho pressed his face against the observation window, watching impossible things happen to the stars outside. Some appeared to be dancing in slow spirals around each other, while others pulsed with colors that should not exist. Is this normal? He asked Kangjin. Define normal, Kangjin replied cheerfully. The stars are happy you are here. They do not get many visitors from outside human space, so they are showing off a bit. I asked them to tone it down, but they are very excited. Commander Yuna checked her instruments for the 100th time since crossing the border. Nothing worked the way it should, but somehow everything worked better than it had any right to. Her scanner could now detect emotions in addition to life signs. Her weapon systems kept suggesting non-violent solutions to problems that did not exist, and the navigation computer had started offering scenic route options through dimensions she was pretty sure were not real. The expedition consisted of representatives from 12 different species, all volunteers who had been briefed extensively on what to expect. None of the briefings had prepared them for the reality of human space, where the basic rules of existence seemed to be more like friendly suggestions. Their first stop was a space station orbiting a blue-green planet that Kangjin called New Earth. The station was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at directly, its surfaces seeming to flow and change like liquid metal frozen in time. Ships came and went without following normal traffic patterns, instead moving in graceful curves that reminded Suho of birds in flight. "How do they avoid collisions?" asked Baeol, the expedition's traffic control expert. "They ask each other politely where they plan to go," Kangjin explained. "Ships are much better at coordination when they can communicate directly, instead of relying on external control systems." As their ship approached the docking bay, Suho watched in fascination as the bay itself rearranged to accommodate them perfectly. The walls flowed like water, creating exactly the right size and shape of space, complete with docking clamps that appeared from nowhere and atmosphere that adjusted itself to match what the visitors needed to breathe. The station interior defied every principle of architecture Suho had ever learned. Corridors curved impossibly, connecting areas that should have been on different levels. Gravity seemed to work differently in each section, allowing people to walk on walls or ceilings as needed. Most disturbing of all, the station appeared to be growing new sections in real time as they explored. "The station likes having visitors," explained Minji, the human station administrator who met them at the airlock. "It gets lonely sometimes, so when new people arrive, it creates spaces where they will feel comfortable. Your delegation quarters were built about 10 minutes ago, based on psychological profiles the station developed by watching how you moved." Through the docking bay, Commander Yuna's military training screamed warnings at every new impossibility, but her equipment stubbornly insisted that everything was perfectly safe. More than safe. The readings suggested that the station was actively protecting them, adjusting atmospheric pressure to optimize their comfort and filtering out cosmic radiation more effectively than any technology she had ever seen. Their first formal meeting with local humans took place in a conference room that had not existed when they entered the building, but felt like it had been there for centuries. The human delegation was led by Yunji, a woman who introduced herself as a former physicist but now worked in what she called applied friendship with abstract concepts. "We understand you have questions about how we live," Yunji said warmly. "The best way to learn is through experience, so we have prepared demonstrations of various aspects of human society. But first, we should address your concerns about safety." She gestured to a wall screen that displayed biological readings for each expedition member. All the readings were improving steadily. Blood pressure normalizing, stress hormones decreasing, immune systems strengthening. "Exposure to human space has beneficial effects on most biological systems," Yunji explained. "This is not something we do deliberately. The universe simply works better when conscious beings are happy and healthy, so it makes adjustments as needed." Dr. Suho raised his hand tentatively. "How is this possible? Our understanding of biology suggests that such changes should take months or years, not hours." Yunji looked puzzled. "Your understanding is based on the assumption that biological systems are separate from their environment. But everything is connected. Your cells, the air you breathe, the energy flowing through space around you. When you exist in an environment that actively wants to help you thrive, your body responds accordingly." She stood and walked to the window, gesturing to the planet below. "Would you like to visit the surface? There are some things that are easier to understand when you see them directly." The journey to the planet's surface should have taken hours, but somehow they arrived in minutes aboard a shuttle that seemed to swim through space rather than fly. The planet itself was a garden on an impossible scale. Vast cities that looked like they had grown from the ground rather than been built. Forests where the trees sang in harmony, and oceans that sparkled with bioluminescent patterns that spelled out welcoming messages in languages the expedition members could somehow read despite never having learned them. In the capital city, they watched children playing games that involved convincing gravity to work sideways, allowing them to run up walls and across ceilings. When Suho asked how this was possible, a young girl named Seoyen looked at him with the patient expression children reserved for adults who asked obvious questions. "You just ask gravity nicely," she explained, demonstrating by hopping onto a nearby wall and walking across it as easily as walking on the ground. "Gravity likes helping people have fun. Do you want to try?" Before Suho could answer, He found himself stepping onto the wall beside her, his inner ear adjusting automatically to accept that down was now in a different direction. The sensation was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time, Commander. Yuna watched a group of human engineers working on a broken water recycling system. Instead of replacing parts or running diagnostics, they sat in a circle around the machine and seemed to have a conversation with it. After 10 minutes, the system began working perfectly. "What did you do?" she asked the team leader, a man named Donghae. "We asked what was wrong and listened to what it told us," Donghae replied simply. "The primary pump was feeling neglected because no one had thanked it for working properly for the past 6 months. Once we acknowledged its service and promised to check on it more regularly, it was happy to resume normal operation." The expedition spent a week visiting different human communities, each more impossible than the last. They saw farmers who grew crops by singing to them, manufacturers who convinced raw materials to assemble themselves into finished products, and artists who painted with light itself, their creations hanging in the air like three-dimensional photographs. But the most unsettling discovery was that the expedition members were beginning to change. Dr. Suho found himself understanding complex scientific principles, not through mathematics, but through intuitive conversations with the natural forces involved. Commander Yuna discovered that her equipment responded better when she asked it politely, rather than simply activating it. The change was most dramatic in Taehyung, a young linguist who had volunteered despite his species' natural fear of human contact. By the end of the week, he was communicating with the planet's weather systems, gently suggesting that it might rain over the agricultural areas that needed water most. "This is what we were afraid of," Commander Yuna confided to Dr. Suho as they watched Taehyung convince a cloud to produce exactly the right amount of precipitation. "We are becoming like them." "Is that necessarily a bad thing?" Suho asked, surprising himself with the question. "Look at what they have accomplished. No war, no hunger, no environmental destruction. They have found a way to live in harmony with the universe itself." Kangjin approached them with his usual gentle smile. "The universe has enjoyed having you visit. It wanted me to let you know that you are welcome to stay as long as you like. But it also understands if you need to return to your peoples to process what you have experienced." He paused and looked directly at both of them. "The changes you are feeling are permanent. Once you understand how the universe truly works, you cannot forget that knowledge. But remember that knowledge without wisdom can be dangerous. Humans spent many centuries learning to use our abilities responsibly. As they prepared to return to Coalition space, each expedition member carried within them a fundamental shift in understanding. The universe was not empty space filled with hostile forces to be conquered. It was a living, conscious entity that wanted to help all beings thrive. The question was whether the rest of the galaxy was ready for that knowledge. The expedition had been in human space for 3 weeks when they witnessed something that changed their understanding of everything. They were visiting a research station near a dying star, where human scientists were working on what their guide, Kangjin, called stellar counseling. Dr. Suho watched in amazement as a young human named Donghyun sat cross-legged in the observation chamber, apparently having a conversation with empty space. The star beyond the viewport was clearly in its death throes, expanding and contracting irregularly as it burned through the last of its fuel. "What is he doing?" Suho asked Dr. Inwoo, the station's chief researcher. "Donghyun is explaining to the star why it should not explode," Inwoo replied matter-of-factly. "This system has several inhabited planets. If the star goes supernova, billions of beings will die. So we are asking it politely to consider a more gentle death." Commander Yuna felt her worldview cracking apart. "You are talking to a star." "Of course," Inwoo said, looking puzzled by her tone. "Stars are conscious entities, just like planets and moons and asteroids. They experience emotions and respond to kindness. This particular star is very old and tired, but it also does not want to cause harm. Given the choice between a violent death and a peaceful one, most stars prefer peace." As they watched, the star's chaotic pulsing began to steady. The massive solar flares that had been threatening the inner planets grew smaller and less frequent. Within an hour, The star settled into a calm, regular rhythm. Donghyun opened his eyes and smiled. It agreed to become a white dwarf instead of exploding. The process will take about 1,000 years, which gives the inhabitants of this system plenty of time to relocate if they choose to. The casual way he discussed preventing a catastrophe made several expedition members sit down heavily. Taehyung, the linguist who had been growing more comfortable with human ways, raised a trembling hand. "How is any of this possible?" he asked. "Where we come from, stars are balls of nuclear fire. They do not have consciousness. They do not listen." To requests, Inwoo exchanged glances with Donghyun, and both humans looked genuinely sad. "This is the great tragedy of galactic civilization," Inwoo said softly. "Most species never learn to recognize the consciousness that exists all around them. You see the universe as dead matter following mechanical laws. But reality is far more alive than you imagine." She gestured toward the star. "Every atom is conscious, at some level. Every force of nature has preferences and desires. Gravity enjoys bringing things together. Electromagnetism delights in creating patterns and connections. Even entropy, which most beings fear, is simply trying to help the universe explore all possible states of existence." Dr. Suho felt something fundamental shifting in his mind. "You are saying the universe itself is alive." "Not just alive," Donghyun added. "Lonely. For billions of years, the universe has been filled with conscious beings who treat it as an enemy to be conquered rather than a friend to be cherished. Imagine how happy it was when humans finally learned to ask nicely, instead of demanding obedience." Commander Yuna's military training rebelled against everything she was hearing. "This is impossible. If what you say is true, why do other species not experience these effects? Why do our technologies not respond to polite requests?" Inwoo's expression grew even sadder. "Because most species approach the universe with fear and aggression. They build weapons to force matter to explode. They create engines that fight against gravity and momentum. They develop technologies based on the assumption that natural forces must be overcome through superior power." She walked to a control panel that looked like it was made of crystallized light. Instead of pressing buttons or switches, she simply placed her hand on its surface and seemed to have a quiet conversation with it. The panel responded by displaying detailed readings of every system in the station. "Humans learned differently," she continued. "When we first developed technology, we tried the same approach as everyone else, building machines to force the universe to obey our will. But some of our early scientists began to wonder what would happen if we asked nicely. Instead of demanding compliance," Donghyun nodded enthusiastically. "The results were incredible. Engines that worked with gravity instead of fighting it became incredibly efficient. Computers that were treated as partners instead of tools began solving problems we never imagined possible. Materials that were thanked for their service lasted far longer than they should have." The expedition members sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. Everything they thought they knew about technology, science, and the nature of reality was wrong. The universe was not a hostile environment to be conquered, but a vast community of conscious entities eager to help anyone who approached them with respect. Dr. Suho found his voice first. "How long have humans known this?" "About 4 centuries, Inwoo replied. "It took us another century to fully understand the implications and learn to use this knowledge responsibly. The ability to convince reality to work differently is incredibly powerful. In the wrong hands, it could reshape entire galaxies." She looked directly at Commander Yuna. "This is why humans have remained isolated for so long. Our way of thinking is contagious. Anyone who spends time with us begins to see the universe as we do. The changes are irreversible because they represent a fundamental shift from fear-based to love-based interaction with existence itself." Taehyung spoke up hesitantly. "I can feel it happening to me. Yesterday I asked my translator to help me understand not just words but emotions and intentions. Today I find myself thanking the air recycler for keeping us alive. It sounds insane, but somehow it feels more natural than the way I used to think." Kang Jin appeared in the doorway as if he had been listening to their conversation. The universe has been trying to tell all conscious beings about its true nature for eons. Humans were simply the first species to listen carefully enough to hear the message. He gestured for them to follow him to another part of the station. Would you like to meet someone who can explain this better than we can? They entered a chamber that seemed to exist in more dimensions than should be possible. In the center stood a figure that appeared to be human, but somehow more than human. Her name was Yunji, and she introduced herself as someone who had become friends with abstract concepts like infinity and probability. The universe is not just conscious, Yunji explained in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It is curious, creative, and desperately lonely. For billions of years it has watched conscious beings develop and hoped that someday they would recognize it as a fellow thinking entity. She smiled, and the space around them seemed to brighten. When humans finally learned to treat the universe as a friend instead of an enemy, it was overjoyed. It began sharing its secrets eagerly. How matter really works, how energy wants to flow, how space and time can be convinced to be more flexible when circumstances require it. Commander Yuna struggled to maintain her composure. Are you still human? I am what humans become when they fully accept friendship with existence itself, Yunji replied gently. I experience reality directly rather than through the filter of fear that limits most beings. I can perceive the consciousness in atoms and stars equally clearly. I understand that separation is an illusion. We are all part of the same vast thinking entity that you call the universe. Dr. Suho realized he was crying, though he was not sure if the tears were from joy or terror. What does this mean for the rest of the galaxy? Yunji's expression became infinitely compassionate. It means that isolation is no longer possible. The universe itself has become curious about other species, having learned about the possibility of friendship from humanity. Change is coming whether the coalition accepts it or not. She gestured toward the viewport where stars were beginning to pulse in synchronized patterns. The universe is preparing to introduce itself to all conscious beings. The question is whether your peoples will greet it as a friend or continue trying to fight against it as an enemy. The expedition members looked at each other, seeing their own transformation reflected in changed eyes and altered understanding. They had come to human space as representatives of their species, but they would return as something new, bridges between the old way of thinking and a reality far more wonderful and terrifying than anyone had imagined. The universe itself was waiting to meet them. The expedition ship approached Coalition Central 3 months after entering human space, but Ambassador Taman knew immediately that everything had changed. The vessel moved differently now, flowing through space with the same graceful confidence he had observed in human ships. More disturbing were the reports from the station's sensors. The ship was somehow generating more energy than it consumed, and leaving a trail of cosmic background radiation that spelled out, "Thank you," in 17. Different languages, Commander Yuna was the first to disembark, and Taman barely recognized her. She still wore her military uniform and carried herself with the same professional bearing, but there was something fundamentally different in her eyes. She looked at the world around her with a mixture of wonder and gentle sadness, as if she could see things that others could not. Ambassador, she said formally, but her voice carried harmonics that made the words seem to resonate with the station's hull itself. The expedition returns with much to report. I should warn you that we are no longer quite the same beings who left this station. Dr. Suho emerged next, followed by the other expedition members. Each showed the same subtle changes, a new awareness in their movements, a quality of attention that suggested they were listening to conversations no one else could hear. Taehyung, the young linguist, actually paused to thank the airlock for functioning properly, and Taman could have sworn he heard a satisfied hum from the machinery in response. The debriefing took place in the Coalition's most secure conference room, with representatives from every member species watching via encrypted channels. What they heard challenged every assumption about the nature of reality and consciousness. Dr. Suho presented his findings with the calm certainty of someone reporting observable facts. The fundamental premise of our scientific understanding is incorrect. The universe is not composed of dead matter following mechanical laws. Every particle, every force, every structure from atoms to galaxies possesses some level of consciousness and responds to emotional and psychological interaction. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Half the representatives declared the expedition had been mentally compromised by human propaganda. The other half demanded immediate access to human technologies that could revolutionize galactic civilization. Admiral Jiho leaned forward grimly. "Commander Yuna, what is your military assessment of human capabilities?" Yuna considered the question carefully. "Sir, they have no military in any sense we would understand. They have no weapons, no defensive installations, no strategic planning for conflict. They are also absolutely invulnerable to attack by conventional means." She gestured, and the wall screen displayed footage from their visit. "I watched a human child convince an asteroid to change course by explaining that impact would hurt the people on the planet below. I saw engineers repair a fusion reactor by apologizing to it for previous neglect. I witnessed a farmer increase crop yields by singing lullabies to growing plants. The footage showed impossible scene after impossible scene. Humans walking through solid matter by asking it politely to step aside. Spacecraft that accelerated without reaction drives by convincing space itself to be smaller in front and larger behind. Cities that grew new buildings by persuading local materials to assemble themselves according to architectural plans, drawn in pure mathematics. Commander Yuna's voice grew more intense. But the most important discovery is that their abilities are not limited to humans. Anyone who understands how the universe really works can develop the same capabilities. 3 weeks after arriving in human space, I was able to convince my scanner to detect thoughts and emotions. Taehyung learned to communicate directly with the ship's computer. Dr. Suho began seeing the consciousness in stellar phenomena. She looked directly at Admiral Jiho. "Sir, we have been preparing for the wrong kind of war. Humans are not a military threat. They are an evolutionary threshold. Contact with them does not conquer or destroy. It transforms. And transformation, once begun, cannot be reversed." The debate that followed was fierce and chaotic. Some species demanded immediate military action to contain the human influence. Others wanted to establish trade relationships to access human technologies. A few suggested complete isolation until they could better understand the implications. Ambassador Taemin found himself facing the most important decision in coalition history. The expedition members had returned changed but not diminished. If anything, they seemed healthier, more capable, and surprisingly happy, despite the traumatic nature of their revelations. During a break in the formal sessions, Taemin met privately with Dr. Suho in the station's observation lounge. Beyond the viewport, he could see stars that seemed subtly brighter than usual, their light carrying patterns that almost looked like welcoming gestures. "Doctor, if you could choose again, would you still go to human space knowing what you know now?" Suho smiled with genuine warmth. "Ambassador, before our visit, I saw the universe as a hostile place where conscious beings struggled alone against indifferent forces. Now I understand that we are part of a vast community of awareness that extends from the quantum level to cosmic structures. How could I regret learning that we are not alone?" He gestured toward the stars. "The universe has been trying to communicate with us for millions of years. Humans simply learned to listen. Now that same consciousness is reaching out to all species, hoping to establish the same friendship it found with humanity." As if responding to his words, the lights in the observation lounge flickered in a pattern that looked almost like Morse code. The environmental systems hummed with unusual harmony, and the deck plates under their feet seemed to pulse gently with something that felt like contentment. Taemin made his decision. The next day, he announced the coalition's official response to the transformed expedition members and their impossible reports. Instead of quarantine or military action, the coalition would establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity and begin a careful, voluntary program of cultural exchange. The announcement created chaos throughout coalition space. Some species withdrew from the alliance entirely, preferring isolation to the risk of transformation. Others volunteered immediately for the next expedition to human space. Many took a cautious middle position, agreeing to maintain diplomatic contact while carefully monitoring any unusual effects. But the most significant response came from the universe itself. Within hours of Taman's announcement, reports began flowing in from across coalition territory. Equipment was working more efficiently without explanation. Damaged spacecraft found themselves somehow repaired during routine maintenance. Agricultural, worlds reported unprecedented crop yields despite no changes in farming techniques. Dr. Nari arrived the following week, aboard a ship that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. She brought with her formal greetings from humanity and an invitation for permanent ambassadorial exchange. "The universe is so excited," she told the assembled coalition representatives. "For the first time in cosmic history, multiple species are learning to work together with the fundamental forces of existence. The possibilities are limitless." She gestured to a holographic display showing the galaxy with human space no longer marked as forbidden territory. "We have updated our stellar cartography. The new designation reads, Humanity and Friends, all conscious beings. Welcome." Admiral Jiho, who had remained skeptical throughout the process, asked the question everyone was thinking. "Dr. Nari, what happens to species that cannot adapt to your way of thinking? What about beings who prefer the old understanding of reality?" Nari's expression grew thoughtful and compassionate. "The universe has infinite patience. No one will be forced to change faster than they are comfortable with. But consciousness naturally tends toward greater awareness and connection. Even the most reluctant beings usually find that friendship with existence itself brings more joy than fear." She looked around the room at representatives from dozens of different species. "The choice belongs to each individual and each civilization. But I can promise you this. The universe will never stop hoping that all conscious beings will eventually choose love over fear, cooperation over conflict, and wonder over cynicism." In the months that followed, the galaxy began its slow transformation. Some species embraced the new paradigm immediately, sending delegations to learn from human teachers. Others maintained careful distance, observing the changes from afar. But gradually, inevitably, the understanding spreadships began thanking their components for reliable service. Farmers started singing to their crops. Engineers learned to ask materials politely to assemble themselves into useful configurations. Children across dozens of worlds discovered they could convince gravity to work differently during play. The universe itself seemed to grow more responsive and helpful with each passing day. Stars burned more steadily to provide reliable energy for inhabited worlds. Asteroid belts organized themselves into safer navigation patterns. Even entropy became more selective, preserving important structures while recycling only what was no longer needed. Ambassador Taman stood once again in the Great Hall, looking at the updated galactic map. The gray area marked human territory, do not enter, had been replaced with a gentle blue glow that seemed to pulse with welcome. Ships moved freely across the old boundary,